Hi, I'm Daniel. Back again with another poorly lit video essay. Today we're going to be talking about something that might be a little bit controversial, but it's okay. It's okay. 2025 has begun somewhat dramatically here in the US. Not only do we have one of the largest domestic terrorist incidents in recent memory, the death of one of the few presidents you can argue was actually a good person, and massive fires in Southern California, but it also snowed in Georgia? Now, I have sympathy towards all of those negatively affected by these tragedies. Well, the Georgia snowing one isn't really a tragedy, we just kind of freak out about it. But it can all get lost in the daily news cycle, right? Especially since the year began long after the shooting of United Healthcare CEO, another tragic event in which I sympathize with the victims. The victims, of course, being people denied coverage by the American healthcare industry. I have no opinion on Brian Thompson, he was not on my network. Now, you can probably guess my opinion on the inauguration of Donald Trump. That being said, I do not want to make this channel simply a soapbox for my political views. That'll just encourage only people who already agree with me to watch, which to me is less compelling of an effort than education, or really edutainment, that often includes a fact-based support for my own conclusions instead of simply preaching to a choir that has already reached those conclusions too. That being said, one cannot discuss things like history or geography or even frankly linguistics, and especially current events, while staying purely neutral. Everyone has a bias and I am no exception, and while some do a good job at hiding the bias, I feel that it's too easy to extend needless grace to a side that is clearly wrong for the sake of playing it fair. The same way cable news, even the so-called liberal variety, will have panels pitting experts in the field against some random blogger that likes to yell. Have them interrupt each other for 120 seconds and pretend this is a fair exchange of ideas when in reality it's just ESPN for boring people. Sometimes the facts have a bias against a certain opinion because that opinion is just BS made to consolidate power, often by scapegoating specific groups of people, preying on misinformed fears, succumbing to obvious logical fallacies, or simply just lying. It's okay to fall for the propaganda sometimes. It's literally lawyers and businessmen and PR firms that sell you these ideas. They're supposed to sound attractive. Just understand the intentions, be mature enough to admit when you get duped, instead of doubling down. Now, I'm not saying everything I believe is necessarily the truth. In fact, I've evolved a lot over the years in my beliefs, but everything I believe is my best interpretation of the facts I've been exposed to. And in a country where the aforementioned scapegoating and preying on fears is becoming more and more likely to send the U.S. down an even darker road than it already has been, I believe it's important to speak the truth instead of trying to find a happy medium between the idea of equality for all and the guys that are literally doing Nazi salutes. I will not be a useful idiot for the guys doing Nazi salutes, and my goal here is to keep you guys from being useful idiots yourselves. Anyway, with that being said, this video is not about the harmful policies Donald Trump supports, at least not directly, even though those will cause harm to many people, both in America and outside of America, and really anyone who isn't a member of the hyper-wealthy, especially if you don't look like me. No, this is about the stupid policies. You already know the main stupid one if you're reading the title or the thumbnail of this video. I don't know exactly where I'll put it. But in Trump's executive order, he also declared that Denali, the largest mountain in the U.S. located in the state of Alaska, be renamed to Mount McKinley. For some background, the mountain is literally named Denali. That's what most people in Alaska call it, regardless of their political ideology or ethnic background, and it derives from the name given to it by the Koyukon people, an Athabascan people group who speak a language distantly related to Navajo and probably at least the Ket language of Siberia. Many prospectors entered the region during the late 1890s in what was known as the Yukon or Klondike Gold Rush. What would you do for a Klondike? Changed the name of a mountain, apparently. And one prospector took it upon himself to name the mountain after William McKinley, a president of the U.S. at the time. This was widely accepted in the lower 48, or I guess the lower 45 in the late 1890s when he named this. And despite many attempts and support from the Alaskan people, the name wasn't changed due to resistance by politicians from Ohio, McKinley's home state. I'm gonna be honest, this is really stupid, Ohio. Not saying there's anything wrong with state pride. You guys have a few real things to look at. Your football team wins the national championship every decade or so. LeBron James and Steph Curry were both born in Akron. Your flag's cool. See? It's a cool flag. I like it. Although, the Alaska flag's better, but, you know. Why do you gotta take pride in randomly naming other people things? It doesn't make sense. Like, imagine how stupid Georgia would look if we renamed Honolulu after Jimmy Carter and pitched a fit when you guys tried to change it back. I mean, Jimmy Carter definitely did way more in his post-presidency than McKinley. Sorry, that's joke in bad taste? Anyway, the name change is just anti-Obama nonsense. While there's lots to criticize about Obama's administration, albeit perhaps not as much as certain other administrations, opposing something just because Obama did it is not really rational. Right? Of course, almost none of the people that got mad about Obama's recognition of the mountain's real name care about William McKinley, and they definitely don't care about the indigenous people of Alaska. They're merely signaling that they find Obama's actions in general distasteful, and opposing Obama is a virtue that they want to signal. So this reversal, despite opposition from Alaska's two senators who happen to be Republicans — Trump's a Republican, by the way, in case you were watching from another country and don't know that much about U.S. politics — isn't that surprising given the current climate and patterns in political behavior? The part that astonishes me the most is Trump's declaration that the Gulf of Mexico should be known as the Gulf of America. At first glance, this is one of the most idiotic things I've heard in my life, but upon closer examination, it's one of the most idiotic things I've heard in my entire life. One of the earliest uses of the term was a joke proposition by Stephen Colbert, and another is a joke bill in the Louisiana state legislature. It's not an idea that should be taken seriously, and yet here we are. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the many seas in the Atlantic Ocean. What exactly a sea is can sometimes be up for debate, especially since the term is also used generically to mean all of the planet's oceans, and more specific terms such as Gulf or Bay are often used interchangeably. Usually we have a pretty good consensus, however, with island chains, peninsulas, and ocean currents dividing the borders of seas as larger regions among oceans. Although, once again, the terminology is rarely consistent, as the Caspian Sea is an example of something known as a sea that doesn't drain into an ocean. But this is not a video on drainage basins, which I might make soon. Bodies of water are often given names that reflect nearby regions, such as the Baltic Sea, which borders the Baltic nations and actually predates the term of that region. Interestingly, cross-linguistically, this is not always used as the term for the Baltic Sea. In Germanic languages other than English, it's typically known as the East Sea. For example, in Danish, it's Østersøen. God, why did I pick the Danish one? Oddly enough, in Finnish, it's Itämeri, which also means East Sea and is likely due to influence from Germanic languages such as Swedish, but doesn't make any sense because the Baltic is actually to the west of Finland. Nevertheless, that's a good example of how hydronyms, or names for bodies of water, are often based directly on etymology and not rigorously testing what names make the best sense. In other words, we just kind of call things what we call them and go along with it because we know what it means. It's not a political statement in Finland to call the sea the East Sea. Everyone knows it's to the west. Just how as if I say Gulf of Mexico, I'm not advocating for Mobile, Alabama to be annexed by the nation of Mexico. I am advocating that for the record, but that has no bearing on what I call the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the Baltic Sea is pretty standard in that people use different names for it in different languages, so it's not really a dispute any more than saying it's a dispute to call a cat un gato. It's literally just a different language. There are, of course, numerous real disputes over names. Notable examples include, but are not limited to, the Sea of Japan, also known as the East Sea. Japan prefers the former, while South Korea prefers the latter, and while the former seems more common in most countries, there seems to be a case to be made that either have been in use for a while. The Persian Gulf, which within the last half-decade has been referred to by many in Arab countries as the Arabian Gulf, and while it does not displace the traditional name, some people prefer not to use either name, which has upset Iran, who view the Persian Gulf as the more common name for it traditionally. Obviously, these are all, complex issues, but perhaps an even more touchy subject is the West Philippine Sea, not to be confused with the fairly uncontroversial Philippine Sea to the east of the archipelago nation. The West Philippine Sea is the Philippines' name for their portion of the South China Sea, which is, as many of you probably know, one of the most heavily disputed areas on Earth. That being said, these disputes of names often don't even correlate with disputed territory. International waters can often be a touchy thing to delineate, and often different countries will have different interpretations of how maritime borders should be drawn. While often this can still be chalked up to petty nationalist feuds, sometimes there is merit to these disagreements, whether it be for resources, either on small islands or just in the water, such as oil reserves, or access to shipping lanes, or even actually inhabited islands that are in the disputed area. There's often a tangible reason to not simply let the other side have what they want, even though in many of these cases everyone would be better off to find a diplomatic compromise. But no, this is just about the names. It isn't even about names that reflect local people and their culture and languages, such as the importance of the people of Alaska, both native and otherwise, in referring to their largest mountain by the name that they call it. Nor does it have to do with sovereignty, such as what you call the nation that controls the island of Taiwan. Nor does it have anything to do with potential implications of a larger region with the same name, such as in the Greeks not liking how North Macedonia simply called themselves Macedonia, due to the Greeks having a region which they view as also being part of Macedonia. There's not even a semi-legitimate reason to insist we call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. It's all about optics, isn't it? There's no practical victory, but it's intended to look like a W for America, right? At least if you aren't immediately taken back by the pointlessness and, honestly, neo-imperialism of it all. The same is true for the idea to buy or seize Greenland, Panama, or even Canada. If you view international relations as a sporting event where taking territory is equivalent to winning games and seeing your country on the map is like points on the board, then Trump's plans will make him look like the MVP. The same way that European empires spent centuries waging war and causing literal genocides for territory on the other side of the planet. A practice that we ostensibly decided was a bad thing to do, at least in name. Neocolonialism is definitely a thing. But not only is such pointless nationalist pandering somewhere on the spectrum between stupidity and imperialism, it does nothing to make a gallon of gas cheaper, and wasn't that the point? Many people who have less expertise on economics than I do argue that Trump would decrease inflation and lower taxes, which he is lowering taxes. Not for most of us, just for other wealthy people, his buddies, the guys doing Nazi salutes. Even though this particular virtue signal of renaming the Gulf of Mexico is far less consequential than the unconstitutional declaration to end birthright citizenship or the pardoning of insurrectionists, and far less immoral than the mass deportations, rolling back protections for the trans community, or the efforts to gut Obamacare, which is already, frankly, a conservative compromise compared to the healthcare system in most countries. But this virtue signaling is still indicative of an ideology that prefers nationalist gestures, pun intended, over actually trying to help people in need. Not to mention it opens up discussion of geography, which is a particular interest on this channel, hence this video. And of course, that's why I'm making this video. It all intersects, doesn't it? Much of the story of history is its politics from the past. Linguistics is sometimes definitely has to do with the politics of how we talk, or the geography or history of how we talk, as much as the abstract study of it itself. Obviously, geography will set the stage for the way that nations and groups of people interact with each other. All of these things definitely connect. Stay safe, everyone. Hopefully, like if you're one of the people who thinks that, people like me are overreacting, and it's not going to be that bad, I hope you're right. because, I just as how I withstood the people in the 1930s in Germany who said, oh, well, this guy's not going to be that bad. He's not going to do everything he says he's going to do. I wish that they would have been right. I really think that a lot of things are bad right now and have the potential to get way worse, and a lot of that is caused by a lot of people just being ignorant and falling for propaganda. And it's really scary because it's the same pattern that happens again and again in a lot of places. Try not to fall for that. Think critically. And by think critically, I don't mean ignore what one person tells you and believe what someone else tells you uncritically. I mean, actually think, well, what are people trying to do? Why do people say the things that they say? And are people just trying to trick you? And please learn your geography, learn your history, learn these things, learn about the world around you and about the past, because it's all this kind of patterns. And whether we understand these patterns or not can very easily be the difference between life or death for a lot of people. And try not to forget that. Thank you for watching. Hit all the little stupid buttons, I guess. I mean, you don't have to. You can do what you want. You might not have much time to do what you want, but right now you can.